She was just 19, and on the night before her wedding, she already knew. The world saw a fairy tale, but behind closed doors, the groom had just sent a bracelet to another woman. Her name was Camilla, and she never truly left. There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. What Diana discovered after the honeymoon would crush any young bride. But the real question? What finally pushed Diana to fight back? The real story behind the crown, the affair, and the heartbreak. The pearls shimmered like frozen tears against her skin. As Lady Diana Spencer stood in front of the mirror on the morning of the 29th of July 1981, the world was already calling her the luckiest girl on earth. Yet, among the diamonds and white silk, there was one detail no one noticed, one that would become the silent omen of her destiny. Hidden within the lace of her gown, near her heart, was a small blue ribbon her mother had once given her for protection. But that morning, as she placed it there, the thread snapped. The ribbon fell to the floor. And somewhere deep inside, Diana felt something cold whisper. This love was never meant to be. The grand bells of St. Paul's Cathedral roared to life as she stepped out of the glass carriage. Cameras flashed. A sea of faces shouted her name. She smiled, radiant, nervous, trembling. But even as she walked down the aisle toward Prince Charles, she saw it. Not in his eyes, but in his hesitation. When she reached him, Charles avoided her gaze for the briefest second. His eyes flickered towards someone in the crowd. Camilla Parker Bowles, seated a few rows behind, wearing a pale gray dress and a tilted hat that hid half her face. To the millions watching on television, it was a perfect fairy tale. To Diana, it was a cold stage play in which she was both the heroine and the sacrifice. From the very beginning, this marriage was not born of love, but of duty. The royal family needed a bride for the Prince of Wales, someone young, pure, and pliant. Diana, at just 19, fit the mold perfectly. The monarchy saw her not as a woman, but as a solution. A symbol of renewal for a tired institution. Charles, nearly 13 years her senior, obeyed out of expectation, not passion. His heart, as everyone close to him knew, already belonged to another woman, the married Camilla, the one he called his soulmate. Behind palace walls, Diana was taught how to curtsy, how to smile, how to wave, but no one taught her how to survive the loneliness that comes with being adored by millions yet truly known by none. Within weeks of the wedding, she found love letters hidden in Charles's briefcase. One of them, signed, "Yours forever, Camilla," had the faint scent of gardenia. That night, Diana sat on the edge of her bed in Buckingham Palace and cried until her mascara stained the silk sheets. The fairy tale was over before it even began. Charles treated her with the politeness of a stranger. He praised her beauty in public but mocked her insecurities in private. At formal dinners, he would glance past her, speaking instead to Camilla's name with a softness Diana never heard directed at herself. The palace staff whispered about the other woman, in coded language, but everyone knew. Everyone, except perhaps the young bride who still believed she could fix him. "I'll make him love me," she told her reflection once, her voice trembling between hope and denial. But love cannot be forced in the presence of betrayal. Each time she reached for him, she felt the invisible presence of Camilla between them, calm, calculated, and constant. The pressure was relentless. Every smile dissected, every gesture televised, every tear hidden behind protocol. Diana's body became her battlefield. The pain she could not express in words turned inward into silence, into control. She began to eat, then purge. It was the only way to feel something that belonged solely to her, in a world that demanded perfection. In her private diaries, she would later write, "I felt myself disappearing. The girl I was gone, replaced by a mannequin in a tiara. The young woman who once laughed freely, now spoke carefully, moved cautiously, lived as though walking through a glass maze. Yet, even in her fragility, the world saw only radiance. Her empathy, her warmth, her gentle touch during hospital visits, these became her armor. While her marriage suffocated, her humanity bloomed. But even light cast long shadows. Camilla, always near, always watching, began to step into Diana's life, like a ghost that refused to be banished. At polo matches, Charles would ride to her first. At parties, his eyes sought her across the room. Their secret phone calls echoed in Diana's nightmares. Once, when she confronted him, he replied with a chilling calm, "Camilla is a friend. You're being hysterical." The words sliced through her like glass. That night, she stood alone in a dark corridor of Kensington Palace, her hands pressed to her chest as though to hold her heart together. Through the silence, she whispered the truth she could no longer deny. I was chosen to be his wife, but she was chosen to be his love. And from that moment, something inside her shifted. The girl who had once wanted to be loved began to seek something greater: respect, meaning, and freedom. The palace had made her a wife. The world would make her a legend. As the first year of marriage ended, the illusion of happiness cracked beyond repair. Yet the public still cheered, still adored, still believed. But in the quiet corners of St. James's Palace, an invisible war had already begun, a war, not of armies, but of hearts. One woman clung to a crown that felt like a cage. Another whispered promises in the dark, weaving herself deeper into the life she'd stolen. And between them stood a man too weak to choose, destroying both in his indecision. The ribbon that had fallen on the morning of Diana's wedding remained where it landed, symbol of something pure torn too soon. And as history would later show, the moment that thread snapped, so too did the fate of a woman who would one day become the most loved and most betrayed princess in the world. The palace was magnificent and merciless. Kensington, with its golden mirrors, crimson carpets, and endless corridors, gleamed like a kingdom of dreams. Yet to Diana, every reflection was a reminder that she was living in a cage made of glass, transparent, dazzling, and suffocating. She had entered this world believing she would be cherished, but soon learned that every word, every dress, every glance would be judged, catalogued, and dissected. The walls had ears, the tabloids had claws, and her husband had a secret he no longer bothered to hide. Charles spent long hours at Highgrove, his country estate where the phones never rang, and where Camilla was always visiting friends. Diana, left alone in London, filled her days with official visits and hollow smiles. She learned how to walk in silence beside him while his heart walked elsewhere. "He talks to her every day," one of the footmen whispered. "Sometimes he even calls her before he calls his wife." She pretended not to hear. But every whisper was a knife. The loneliness came in waves, quiet, then crushing. Some nights she sat in her private sitting room, staring at the portraits of queens long dead. They, too, had smiled for history. They, too, had been sacrificed for duty. Diana wondered if their hearts had shattered as beautifully as hers. One evening, she found the courage to ask Charles directly, "Why her? Why not me?" He looked up from his writing desk, his tone clipped and cold. "Because she understands me," he said, "and you never will." The words landed like a verdict. It was not just betrayal, it was erasure. That night, Diana walked barefoot through the empty halls, her gown whispering against the marble floors. The portraits seemed to watch her: Elizabeth I, Victoria, queens who had ruled empires yet died alone. For the first time, she understood. Royalty was not a blessing. It was a sentence. By day, she became the perfect doll: dazzling gowns, tender smiles, flawless posture. The photographers adored her. The people worshipped her. But inside, she was disintegrating. She began to control the only thing she could: her body. When the pain became unbearable, she binged on food, then punished herself for feeling anything at all. It was not vanity. It was survival. The physical act of purging became the only form of control left to a woman who had been stripped of her voice. In her diary, she would later write, "They see my face, but not my fear. I live behind glass, watched, adored, and utterly alone." The palace doctors called it stress. The courtiers called it attention-seeking. No one called it what it truly was: despair. Even as her spirit faltered, Diana's empathy grew stronger. She began visiting hospitals quietly, without cameras, holding the hands of the sick and forgotten. In their pain, she found reflections of her own. The dying, the homeless, the orphaned, they did not bow to her, they simply saw her. In those fleeting moments, she felt human again. The warmth of gratitude in a child's eyes healed her more than any royal protocol ever could. She began to realize that her heart, the very thing the palace dismissed as weakness, was, in fact, her power. but Charles saw only competition. At public events, the cheers that once belonged to him now belonged to her. The people leaned toward Diana, not their prince. She outshone him without trying. And that was an unforgivable sin. Behind closed doors, arguments erupted. "You enjoy this, don't you?" Charles spat one night. "You love the cameras more than your husband." She trembled. "I never asked for any of this." He turned away, muttering something about Camilla being simpler, steadier, real. The palace staff learned to avoid them when they were together. The silences were louder than shouts. The air between them thickened with unspoken rage and icy contempt. Their marriage, once paraded as a symbol of hope, had decayed into a slow, royal tragedy. And still, Diana clung to her sons William, her little anchor, and Harry, her wild heartbeat. With them, she could finally be herself, messy, laughing, barefoot, free. She read bedtime stories, chased them through the gardens, took them to McDonald's in disguise. She wanted them to know a world beyond velvet ropes and palace walls. "If I can't have happiness," she once told a friend, "then I will make sure they do." Yet even her motherhood became a battleground. Camilla's shadow followed her there too. When Charles introduced Camilla to the boys as a friend, Diana's blood ran cold. She realized this was not just infidelity, it was invasion. Camilla was not content to steal a husband. She wanted to rewrite the family itself. By 1986, the illusion of unity was dead. Charles and Diana still appeared together for cameras, but their eyes told a different story, hers full of pain, his full of apathy. He had resumed his affair openly. She had discovered the bracelet he gave Camilla, engraved with their initials. The night she found it, she collapsed in tears. In her trembling hands, she held the proof that her marriage had never been about love, only appearances, obligations, and lies. And yet, even as her world crumbled, the people adored her more than ever. They saw not a princess but a woman surviving in public humiliation with grace. They saw the courage behind her broken smile. In the palace of glass and shadows, Diana learned her first great truth. Royalty could control her image, but not her soul. They could strip her title, but not her tenderness. They could silence her voice, but never her heart. And though she did not yet know it, this quiet rebellion, this simple insistence on feeling would one day make her the most loved woman in the world, and the most dangerous one to those who betrayed her. The honeymoon had barely ended when the illusions began to crack. Behind the palace gates, beyond the golden balconies and the crowds chanting her name, Diana discovered that she had married a man still in love with another woman. The fairy tale had never been real, it was a royal arrangement, a political necessity disguised as romance. And she, barely 20, had been cast as the sparkling ornament of a weary monarchy. The first months of marriage felt like walking through a dream made of glass, dazzling, fragile, and cold. Charles retreated into his duties and his hobbies. He spent long hours away at Highgrove, the countryside estate where Camilla Parker Bowles' laughter could often be heard echoing through the gardens. In Buckingham Palace, Diana's laughter faded into silence. Every evening she dined alone in glittering rooms built for kings. The chandeliers reflected her image, 1,000 times a young princess, radiant in pearls, yet hollow inside. When courtiers addressed her as "Your Royal Highness," she felt the words cut like chains around her wrists. "You're doing splendidly, ma'am," they told her. But splendid wasn't what she wanted. She wanted love. The press adored her, but the palace did not. Her warmth, her spontaneity, her vulnerability, all the qualities that made the public fall in love with her, were seen by courtiers as dangerous. The firm valued silence and composure, not tears and compassion. Diana's emotional honesty, so human and real, was treated as a flaw to be corrected. Charles watched her growing popularity with envy. The crowds that once waited for him now screamed for her. The photographers ignored his speeches to capture her smile. She had become the beating heart of the monarchy, and that, to a man raised on duty and hierarchy, was intolerable. "They're here for you," he said bitterly one night after an event in Sydney. "They're here for us," she tried to correct him. "No," he said coldly. "They're here for you." From that moment, admiration turned into rivalry. Camilla's shadow never left them. Diana found secret letters, late-night calls, and bracelets engraved with initials G and F, their private code for Gladys and Fred, the names they used in secret. Once, just before their wedding, She had overheard Charles on the phone whispering, "Whatever happens, I will always love you." At the time, she had convinced herself he was talking to her. Now she knew he hadn't been. The realization burned like ice in her veins. She confronted him trembling, pleading, desperate. "Why did you marry me if you loved her?" He looked away. "Because it was expected of me." That single sentence shattered whatever innocence she had left. Diana tried to be everything the world demanded: the perfect princess, the perfect wife, the perfect symbol of grace. But perfection is heavy. When the loneliness became unbearable, she turned her pain inward. Food became her comfort and her punishment. She would binge until she felt sick, then force herself to purge. It wasn't vanity, it was control, the only thing she had left. In private, she wrote, "I am a bird in a golden cage. My wings are beautiful, but I cannot fly." The palace doctors dismissed it as nerves. The queen advised patience. But patience could not fix a marriage built on deceit. When the camera lights came on, Diana smiled. Her beauty was flawless, her charm effortless. The world saw only the fairy tale glow. The gowns, the jewels, the shy tilt of her head. They didn't see the woman shaking in silence behind closed doors. Yet, amid her sorrow, her humanity began to bloom. She threw herself into charity work, holding the hands of AIDS patients when no one else would. She visited the homeless, the sick, and the forgotten, and in their eyes, she found what she had been denied: sincerity. They didn't want her title. They wanted her heart. And she gave it freely. To the people, she was an angel. To the palace, she was a problem. The tension between her public glow and private despair grew unbearable. Charles escaped to Camilla's arms for peace. Diana stayed in her palace room, clutching her diary, whispering to herself, "This cannot be love." Their public appearances became an act: stiff smiles, scripted gestures, the illusion of unity. But every camera flash captured the truth. The distance between them was wider than the crown itself. At state dinners, Charles's eyes drifted to Camilla across the room. At home, he spent nights in another wing of the palace. The tabloids called them the perfect couple. Diana called it a polite war. By 1986, their marriage was a hollow crown. Charles had resumed his affair openly. The courtiers covered for him. The queen remained silent. Diana, drowning in humiliation, tried to reach out to talk, to heal, to love, but the man she married was already gone. Still, the people adored her. Her sorrow became her power. Every tear made her more real to the public, more unreachable to the cold institution that sought to silence her. She had lost her husband, but she had gained something greater: the love of millions who saw their own pain in hers. And yet, in the quiet of the palace, she would still whisper to herself before bed, "He promised forever." But forever was already taken by another woman. Outside, the lights of Buckingham Palace gleamed against the night sky, perfect and pitiless. Inside, a young princess stared into her mirror, not at her reflection, but at the ghost of the woman she used to be. The fairy tale had become a tragedy. And the girl who once dreamed of love now knew, even a crown can be a coffin. By 1990, the illusion of a royal marriage had collapsed. The world still saw the glittering couples smiling from palace balconies. But behind the heavy doors of Kensington and Highgrove, a cold war of the heart had begun. Every word between them became a weapon. Every public smile was a truce that lasted only as long as the camera flash. Diana had stopped trying to win his love now. She fought to keep her sanity. She knew about the phone calls, the gifts, the secret weekends. She knew that Camilla was not just a lover, but a presence woven into every corner of their marriage. Even when she sat beside Charles, she could feel the ghost of another woman between them: the perfume, the laughter, the quiet confidence of a rival who had already won. One night, unable to endure the deceit any longer, she confronted him. "I know everything," she whispered. "About her. About the lies." Charles did not even flinch. He simply stared out the window of their palace apartment, his voice calm and detached. "Well, what did you expect me to do? Be the only man in Britain not allowed a mistress?" That was the night Diana realized she was not fighting for love, she was fighting for dignity. Her defiance began quietly. She stopped asking permission. She attended engagements alone. She wore colors the courtiers said were too bold. She laughed too loudly, spoke too honestly, and refused to hide her humanity. When Charles sought refuge in Camilla's steady silence, Diana sought strength in the crowd's love. The more they tried to contain her, the brighter she shone. The more they dismissed her as unstable, the more the world saw her compassion. At hospitals, she sat beside dying children, unafraid to touch the untouchable. At shelters, she listened to the homeless tell stories of loss and betrayal. The people saw not a princess, but a woman who understood their pain. And in their eyes, she found the only love that asked for nothing in return. Yet within the palace, her kindness was seen as rebellion. The queen's courtiers whispered that Diana was too emotional, too unpredictable. But what they really meant was, she feels too much for someone born into a world built on restraint. Charles, meanwhile, found in Camilla what he called stability. She laughed at his jokes, soothed his insecurities, and never threatened his pride. With her, he could be the charming, misunderstood prince again. With Diana, he had to confront the man he truly was: cold, fragile, and unfaithful. Still, Diana's presence haunted them. The public adored her. Every photo of her hugging a child or wiping away tears pushed Charles and Camilla deeper into the shadows. He began to resent her success, convinced that she manipulated public sympathy. "You're playing the victim," he once told her. "I'm just surviving," she replied. Their home turned into a battlefield of silence, a chessboard of glances and half-spoken truths. He slept in a separate room. She cried in another. The only peace came when their sons ran down the corridors, giggling, unaware of the fractures surrounding them. By 1992, the war exploded beyond the palace walls. Secret recordings of Charles confessing his affair to Camilla, the Tampongate tapes, were leaked to the press. The world listened in disbelief as the heir to the throne whispered crude intimacies to another man's wife. Diana's humiliation was now public property. But instead of breaking, she evolved. She began meeting with journalists, discreetly revealing the truth of her life not out of vengeance, but out of liberation. Her collaboration on Andrew Morton's book, Diana, Her True Story, shattered the monarchy's perfect facade. In its pages, the world saw what she had endured: the eating disorder, the loneliness, the coldness of a husband who never loved her. The monarchy called it betrayal. The people called it bravery. For the first time, Diana controlled the narrative of her own suffering. When the queen urged separation, Diana agreed. It was not freedom, not yet, but it was oxygen. She moved to Kensington Palace, redecorating the rooms in warm creams and soft blues, replacing portraits of ancestors with photos of William and Harry. Here, at last, she could breathe. She learned to drive herself through London, to open her own doors, to make tea without staff. Simple acts of independence became small revolutions. And yet, the pain lingered. She would sometimes catch a glimpse of a newspaper headline about Charles and Camilla, smiling together, and her heart would tighten. She once confessed to a friend, "She won, but I have something she never will: the people's love." That love was her crown now, and she wore it proudly. Diana began to redefine what royalty meant. She walked through minefields in Angola, comforted AIDS patients, and embraced lepers, acts of courage that the palace dismissed as theatrics, but that the world saw as pure empathy. She turned her suffering into service, her heartbreak into purpose. Charles could no longer compete. For every whisper of scandal about Diana, there were 10 photographs of her compassion. For every insult from palace insiders, there were thousands of letters from strangers thanking her for giving them hope. But even warriors grow tired. At night, when the world slept, she still felt the ache of the love that never was. She still dreamed of the shy girl she once had been, the one who believed in forever. In her diary, she wrote, "I am both a prisoner and a phoenix. They tried to destroy me, but I am rising from the ashes of my own sorrow." The war of hearts was not over, but Diana was no longer the victim. She had become something far more dangerous to those who betrayed her. A woman who no longer needed their approval to exist. Freedom did not come with trumpets or titles, it came quietly, like a breath after years underwater. After the separation, Diana walked through Kensington Palace not as a princess bound by protocol, but as a woman reclaiming her life. The air felt lighter, the silence less cruel. For the first time, the rooms were hers. She replaced portraits of long-dead monarchs with photographs of William and Harry. Their laughter became her salvation, the proof that real love still existed. Her world, once limited to royal banquets and rehearsed smiles, expanded to places the crown rarely touched. Hospitals, orphanages, minefields, hospices. She no longer represented an institution. She represented compassion itself. When she shook the hand of an AIDS patient without gloves, the world gasped. It was a simple gesture. Human, fearless, revolutionary. The palace called it reckless. The people called it heroic. "I want to be the queen of people's hearts," she said softly in one interview. And she was. Everywhere she went, cameras followed, but no longer as instruments of control, they became witnesses to her rebirth. She wore her vulnerability openly, turning it into a kind of armor. When she walked through a landmine field in Angola, the world saw not a fallen princess, but a woman unafraid of danger if it meant saving lives. Charles and Camilla watched from afar, trying to repair their image in the wake of public disgust. Yet no press strategy could erase the contrast. Camilla hid in shadows, Diana glowed in daylight. The more the crown distanced itself from her, the more the world embraced her. At home, she remained a devoted mother. She took her sons to theme parks, fast food restaurants, and ordinary cinemas. She wanted them to know how normal people lived, how love existed beyond palace walls. "I want them to grow up feeling emotion," she told a friend. Not duty. But independence came with isolation. The establishment she had defied now turned its back on her completely. Invitations disappeared. Old friends grew silent. Even so, Diana refused to shrink. She began attending events on her own, her elegance commanding every room she entered. Designers called her modern royalty grace without permission. Inside, she was still fragile. There were nights when the loneliness pressed hard against her chest. She had survived betrayal, but not without scars. In her diary, she wrote, "They thought they broke me. But I have learned to live without their approval. I have learned to live with my truth." That truth became her revolution. She was no longer the girl waiting to be loved by a prince. She was a woman loved by the world. Diana had turned pain into purpose, rejection into rebirth. Her kindness had become her crown, her courage, her scepter. She had redefined royalty, not by blood, but by empathy. The monarchy, for all its ancient power, could no longer contain her. She was something far rarer and more dangerous than a princess. She was hope. By the mid-1990s, Diana had become more than a royal figure. She was a global phenomenon. Every word she spoke, every gown she wore, every tear she shed became front-page news. The tabloids that once mocked her now stalked her, chasing her through the streets like hunters in pursuit of prey. The same cameras that had captured her fairy tale wedding now fed on her solitude. Freedom had its price. The crown no longer controlled her, but the press did. Reporters hid outside her gates, helicopters hovered above her home, and photographers camped at every destination she visited. She smiled when they shouted her name. She had learned that silence gave them power, but behind the smile lived exhaustion. Still, she pressed on, seeking meaning in a world that had taken so much from her. Her humanitarian work expanded beyond borders. She visited Bosnia, Angola, India, wherever there was suffering. She appeared, luminous and gentle. Children ran to her instinctively, as if sensing her warmth. Veterans kissed her hands. Victims of war whispered their gratitude. To them, she was not a fallen princess, but a guardian angel in human form. And yet, beneath the grace, her heart remained restless. She longed for peace, for a love that did not come with betrayal or cameras. In 1997, she began seeing Dodi fade kind, protective, someone who treated her not as an icon but as a woman. Together they escaped to the Mediterranean, where, for brief moments, she laughed like a girl again. The sun touched her skin, the wind tangled her hair, and she felt almost free. Almost, but freedom is a fragile thing when the world believes it owns you. The photographs of her on a yacht smiling, barefoot, alive sold for millions. The same tabloids that called her a saint now called her reckless. Every gesture was twisted into a story, every look into scandal. Even her new relationship was turned into ammunition for gossip. They don't see the real me, she told a friend. They never did. They see what they want, an angel, a rebel, a tragedy. But I'm just trying to live. Behind her strength, there was a quiet fear that the same press that built her legend might one day destroy her. She confided to close friends that she felt watched, followed, hunted. One day, she said softly, "They will chase me too far." The summer of 1997 was both her brightest and darkest season. In public, she was dazzling radiant in a sky blue dress at her last charity gala. Laughing, graceful, full of plans for a new life away from Britain. In private, she dreamed of starting a foundation for children, of dedicating herself entirely to humanitarian causes. She was ready to begin again, but fate had one final act waiting. On the night of the 31st of August 1997, Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel in Paris, pursued by a swarm of photographers. The black Mercedes sped through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, flashes exploding in the dark like gunfire. A moment later, silence. Then the shattering of glass. In that instant, the world changed. The Rose of England, radiant, bruised, defiant, had fallen. When dawn broke, millions wept. Strangers lit candles outside Kensington Palace. Mountains of flowers covered the gates. People sobbed as if mourning someone they had personally loved, because, in a way, they had. Diana had bared her heart to the world, and the world had fallen in love with it. The crown bowed its head, but too late. And Camilla, the woman who once lived in shadows, became the symbol of all that had gone wrong. Diana's body was gone, but her spirit lingered, untouchable, eternal. The cameras that once tormented her now turned toward the heavens. And from the wreckage of the tunnel rose, not scandal, but sainthood. She had lived as a woman betrayed and died as a legend reborn. The world had taken everything from her, yet she left behind something indestructible, a legacy of compassion, courage, and truth that no crown could ever equal. The morning after her death, the world stood still. Across continents, church bells tolled, flowers flooded palace gates, and strangers embraced in tears. Britain had not only lost a princess, it had lost its heart. Newspapers carried one word on every front page: Diana. For years, the monarchy had treated her as an outsider. In death, she became its savior. Her passing forced the royal family to face what they had long denied, that the crown without compassion meant nothing. The people demanded humanity, and it was Diana, not the queen, who had shown them what that looked like. At her funeral, the image was unforgettable. Two young princes walking behind their mother's coffin, heads bowed, the world watching in silence. William's jaw trembled. Harry's eyes searched the crowd, perhaps hoping to find her face among the thousands. Elton John's voice trembled through Westminster Abbey. "Goodbye, England's Rose." And the words seemed to echo for all of humanity. Diana's legacy grew beyond borders. Her hands had touched the dying. Her empathy had changed how the world saw illness, war, and love. Long after the flowers wilted, her influence endured in hospital wings named after her, in charities inspired by her compassion, and in the open hearts of her sons, who inherited her courage. William became the steady protector, carrying her gentleness into the future of the crown. Harry carried her fire, defying royal convention just as she once had. In both of them, the world saw her reborn, one half grace, one half rebellion. Time has tried to smooth the pain, but every August, her name blooms again like the rose she once was. She remains the woman who lived too brightly, loved too deeply, and paid the ultimate price for being real in a world built on illusion. Diana, Princess of Wales, not a saint, not a sinner, but something far rarer. A woman who taught the world that love, when lived bravely, can outlast even death.